Hello Year 10, hope that you are well. It's Mrs. Yendall here, and today I'm going to be delivering for you a bit more of an interactive lesson that talks you through and hopefully models for you how to approach Paper 2, Question 2. Now this is quite a nice question. It's known as the summary question. It's worth 8 marks. And it's about 10 minutes that you would spend on this. So today, if you can, get a piece of paper or your book and a pen and a ruler and get ready to work through this with me. Alright, so we're going to make a start. Alright, before we do this, I just want to give you a very quick overview of the whole of English Language Paper 2, just so you know what you're expecting in Section A, which is the reading section. Okay? Question 1 is a really easy one. It's only 4 marks and you literally have to decide whether some statements that you're given are true or false, and there'll be about an extract that you will have to read. Question 2 is the summary question that we're going to be working on today, where you have to write a summary of the differences between the 2 extracts that you get, and they'll give you a particular focus for your summary. That's worth 8 marks, and you should spend about 10 minutes on that. Question 3 is the language analysis question, and this is a great question. You'll be asked to focus on just one of the sources, and you'll have to write down how the writer of that source has used language to convey or present a given focus. It's worth 12 marks and you spend about 15 minutes on that one. Question 4 is the biggie in terms of marks, and it's a comparison question, where you write a comparison of how the writers of source A and source B have conveyed their attitudes towards or about something. So you have to write about both of the sources for that one, 16 marks and 20 minutes. Okay, so back to today, which is question 2 that we're going to be focusing on only. And the question that we are going to be answering today is this one. So it might be a good idea for you to copy this question down on your piece of paper. Write a summary of the differences between the people committing the crimes in each source. Now, a bit of guidance for you here. Question 2 is all about the skill of inference. It means reading between the lines or being able to work out something from what you've read. So it means reading something and thinking about what is suggested or inferred by that. For example, if you read an extract and it's about a boat, and that boat is described as tired, well, from that word tired, we can infer that the boat is old and that it's had quite a long life. We can also infer, because it's tired, that it probably isn't in the best condition anymore. Maybe it's not actually very effective, and therefore it probably isn't the safest or most secure boat. It might even have faults, or it might be unreliable. Now, all of that we've inferred from just that one word, just that short quotation, tired. And that's what this question is asking you to think about, inferring meaning from what you read. Okay, so hopefully you've got this question written down now. It's the one that we're going to look at today, and we're going to be looking at 2 extracts to help us answer it. So write a summary of the differences between the people committing the crime in each source. Alright, now the very first thing I'd like you to write down under that question is the acronym that we use and that I like to teach for tackling this question. And this is the acronym that we use. SQUID, without the U. Quite easy to remember, and it stands for this. S stands for statement. So you make a statement about the first source. We know our focus is about people who've committed a crime, So the source will be something to do with a crime that's been committed. So the first thing we do is we write a statement about the people committing the crime in source A. Secondly, we back that up with short quotations, or even just one quotation, to support that point, just like we do in many English lessons where we find quotes. Then we write about what we can infer from this quote. So what is suggested by that quote about the people committing the crime? What can we work out? What can we read between the lines? And the D is super important for getting the highest marks you can, and it stands for develop. Rather than just writing a brief inference about a quotation, you develop that inference in more detail, just like we did with the boat example. Then you'd use a comparative connective to then compare it with source B. So statement, quote, inference, develop about the people committing the crime in source A, and then a however, in contrast, on the other hand, that kind of connective, and then you do S, Q, I, D about source B. So we've got squid, comparative connective, and then another squid. Now, a word of warning about this question. It's a good thing in a way. Question 2 is not about analysing language. So you are not looking for similes, you're not looking for metaphors, you're not seeing about verbs or adjectives. You must not do this for this question. This question is just about inference. It's what you can infer from what you read, without the analysis part, which is good because it's one less thing to worry about. Okay, so now it's time for us to have a look at the sources that we're going to be using for this question today. The first source, and it's probably a good idea for you to write this down, it's a letter. It was published in The Times, which is a newspaper, on March the 5th, 1850. All right, so this is our first source. I'm going to read it with you. Sir, as The Times is always open for the insertion of any remarks likely to caution the unwary or to put the unsuspecting on their guard against the numerous thefts and robberies committed daily in the streets of London, I am induced to ask you to insert a case which happened on Saturday last, and which I trust may serve as a warning to those of your lady readers who still carry purses in their pockets. A young lady, and as the police reports add, a very prepossessing appearance, a relation of the narrator's, was walking between 12 and 1 o'clock with another young lady, a friend of hers, in Albany Street, where she resides, when she was accosted by a boy about 11 years of age, who asked her in the most beseeching tones to buy a few oranges of a poor orphan who hadn't a bit of bread to eat. She told him to go away, but he kept alongside, imploring assistance and making some cutting remarks about the ingratitude of the world in general and of young ladies in particular. As his manner became very troublesome, the lady threatened to give him in charge of a policeman, and looked down every area to find one, but there was not one even there, and the boy kept up his sweet discourse and slight pushes alternately, the latter with the basket on which he carried his oranges, until the lady reached her own doorstep. It then occurred to her that in the boy's ardour to sell his oranges he might have taken her purse. Her friend thought so too. A trembling hand was inserted into the pocket, the purse was gone, and so was the lady's happiness. She flew after the thief, who, knowing young ladies were not made for running, coolly deposited his basket on a doorstep a little way off and ran away whistling. This brave young lady ran also, shouting, "Stop thief! Stop thief!" But then young ladies are not made for shouting, God forbid. And she looked in the fond hope that a policeman might be found. But no such luck. The culprit got safely off with the purse and its contents, and no kind passer-by tried to help the young lady, who was thus shamefully duped and robbed. Ladies, young and old, never carry your purses in your pockets. Beware of canting beggars, and beggars of all sorts, that infest the streets, and above all, keep a watchful eye about you, and give the widest possible berth to the Orange Boy. So that is us finishing the reading of Extract A. And remember, our focus for this extract is to think about how the people that have committed a crime are being presented to us. Okay, so on to source B now. Source B is a more modern source. It's an article from The Sun, so again another newspaper, in 2016, so much more recently, and it's called Ole the Twist, modern-day Fagin who forced gang of migrant child pickpockets to steal from Brit tourists is arrested in Spain. So it's an article from The Sun from 2016. We're going to read it together again now. And remember, your focus as we read is to think about how the people who have committed a crime are being presented to us. A modern-day Fagin who forced a gang of child pickpockets to steal from British tourists in Spain has been arrested. Cops say the gang leader, named locally as Hassim Sejic, 44, sent out an army of workers every morning to find victims like the Charles Dickens character in Oliver Twist. 9 girls living in slum-like conditions were discovered during a raid on one of the properties used by the gang. Bosnian Sejic was one of 16 people held in Barcelona during an operation involving local police in the Catalan capital, Spanish National Police and Europe. Officers believe the Fagin figure's area of operations extended across Spain as well as the south of France. A spokesman for Spain's National Police said, "The 16 people held in Barcelona are suspected of forcing women that came from Bosnia, including several minors, to work as pickpockets in Spanish tourist areas and on public transport. The organisation, composed of different family groups, traded the youngsters, exchanging them and transferring them to different cities for around €5,000. In one of the searches in Barcelona, 9 minors who weren't being schooled were found living in awful conditions." A statement from the force added, "They were taught how to steal from victims and smuggled into Spain with fake ID. The clan, based principally in Barcelona, was organised around the figure of a patriarch who directed operations in the whole of Spain and the south of France. Underneath the patriarch, a perfectly structured organisation existed with female and male lieutenants." Okay, so back to our focus then. Back to the question that we are preparing to answer. The question is, as you remember, write a summary of the differences between the people committing the crime in each source. So we've got to go back to source A and look for anything to do with the people who are committing the crime and how they are described to us. We then go to source B and do the same thing. And that will help us form our squid points for each of the sources. Okay, so I've displayed for you here again source A, but this time in red you will see that I've highlighted all the bits that I could find that relate to how the person committing the crime is being described. So in the case of source A, it's obviously the little boy. It's the boy that pickpocketed the woman, alright? So I've got when she was accosted by a boy about 11 years of age. He asked her in the most beseeching tones. He kept alongside, imploring assistance and making some cutting remarks, as his manner became very troublesome. So he was very troublesome. The boy kept up his sweet discourse and slight pushes, so he was quite physical with her, but he persevered as well. Later on, knowing young ladies were not made for running, he coolly deposited his basket on a doorstep a little way off and ran away whistling. So that kind of suggests that he doesn't feel bad about what he's done. The culprit got safely off with the purse and its contents, so he's quite skilled, perhaps, at what he's doing. So you can see that I've gone through and I've just highlighted all the bits that I could use that relate to how the person committing the crime is being described to us. And we will see that it's quite different in this case. So in this case, we've got child pickpockets again, but they were forced to do it. So in red at the top, I've got forced a gang of child pickpockets to steal from British tourists. He sent out an army of workers, so there were lots of them. That's different, isn't it, from source A, because in source A it was one boy by himself. Here we've got a lot of them together. 9 girls living in slum-like conditions. So the slum-like conditions helps us work out that these girls were treated very badly. Bit further down, forcing women that came from Bosnia, including several minors, to work as pickpockets. So again, they were forced to do it. They'd come from another country. Some of them were children. So rather than being straightforward criminals, we can work out that these people did not intend to be criminals, that they were being forced to. They were traded. They were transferred to different cities, so we can probably infer they were quite helpless. They weren't being schooled, so again, they're treated very, very badly. There's less of a sense of someone who knows exactly what they're doing, like there was in source A, and the boy who was quite skilled and manipulative at the way that he stole the woman's purse. So again, see what I've done? I've highlighted in red all the bits that relate to how the criminal is presented to us. Okay, so it's now time to start to gather those bits of evidence from source A and source B so that we can write up our response. I'm just going to model for you one particular point that I could make with my evidence and my inference. So I'm going to model the squid process for you in source A and source B, and then I'm going to show you what that would look like written up as a finished full paragraph. Now in source A, as we saw with the little boy who pickpocketed the purse from the woman on the street, I think straight away it seems the statement I can make is that the person committing the crime in source A is presented as quite devious, quite manipulative. So I'm going to use both those words. So I've got devious and manipulative down. Now the evidence that I would use for that, I'm not just going to go for one quote, I'm going to go for 2. So the fact that he asked her in the most beseeching tones, that word beseeching helps me to understand that he was trying it on almost, that he was kind of using his age to kind of maybe make her feel sorry for him. So that's my first quote. My second one is the fact that he presented himself to her as a poor orphan who hadn't a bit of bread to eat. He's obviously trying to make her feel sorry for him. So shows it that he's possibly a bit devious, a bit manipulative. So then I have to think, right, what am I going to say about those quotes? What can I infer from this? And I have to do it in detail. I have to develop that inference. Excuse me. So I'm going to say, from this, we can infer that he uses his age and that beseeching tone to present an innocent front and deceive people. He tries to gain sympathy by speaking of his hunger and how poor he is. The fact he says he's an orphan tells us that he's got no parents, so it's going to get people sorry for him again. It's likely to generate sympathy due to having to fend for himself at such a young age. Now, he's doing all that on purpose, isn't he? So he's doing all that to make us feel sorry for him, to make the woman feel sorry for him. So because of that, he's presented as quite devious and manipulative. So that's how I would kind of approach using squid, with one idea, one statement about source A. Again, back to source B. Now, the people committing the crimes are presented quite differently compared to that pickpocket boy with the oranges in source A. Here we have criminals who are very, very different. They are treated very badly. It's clear that they live in terrible conditions. It says that they've been forced to come from Bosnia and they've been forced to steal. So the people committing the crimes are quite different here. So back to my grid that I've got for us here. And I'm looking at source B this time. And rather than saying a statement that the people committing the crimes are devious and manipulative, I'm not going to say that here because it's clear that's not true. So I'm going to say, well, actually, in source B, my statement would be that the people committing the crime are presented as vulnerable or victims. I'm going to use both those words, vulnerable and victims. My evidence that I'm going to use, well, I've got two quotations again. The first one, that this person, this man, forced a gang of child pickpockets to steal from British tourists, and forcing women that came from Bosnia, including several minors. So they're two quotations that would match that statement that these people committing the crime in source B are vulnerable and victims. My detailed inference. So what am I going to say about these quotes? What else can I say about this quote? How else can I infer meaning? So, got the word forced allows us to infer that the criminals were not acting on their own choice and they were actually being pressured by others. The fact that the women came from Bosnia could also suggest that they might not be familiar with the language, so maybe we can infer that they might be scared or feel threatened. You can also talk about the fact that there are minors involved, and minors are children. They can't, necessarily look after or defend themselves properly. So all of that supports this idea that the people committing the crime in source B are vulnerable and victims. Right, this is where the magic happens. We've come up with some statements. We've chosen our evidence. We know what we can infer about those bits of evidence and what we can learn from that. Now we have to write it all up. Now obviously, this is me that's written this, and there isn't one way to write a perfect paragraph, but if you're using Squid and you're following that basic framework of statement, quote or quotes, inference, and then develop that inference, this is what that might now look like. So I'm going to read it to you. As you look at it, think about where I am hitting each part of the SQUID acronym. In source A, the individual committing the crime, pickpocketing the woman, is presented as devious and manipulative. The fact that he asked her in the most beseeching tones suggests that he uses his age and beseeching tone to present an innocent front and deceive people. He also states that he is a poor orphan who hadn't a bit of bread to eat. From this, we can infer that he tries to gain sympathy by speaking of his hunger and how poor he is. Orphan tells us that he has no parents, so is likely to generate sympathy due to having to fend for himself at such a young age. we can infer that he may be using this information in a manipulative way to make people feel sorry for him. In contrast, in source B, the people committing the crimes are presented as victims rather than criminals. The text talks about someone who forced a gang of child pickpockets to steal from British tourists and forcing women that came from Bosnia, including several minors. This infers that the child pickpockets had no choice about the crime they committed, and possibly infers that they were abused. The women who came from Bosnia may not have been able to speak English and would therefore be even more vulnerable. Minors suggest that they were too young to be able to look after themselves and may have been easily manipulated by someone. So that is a full squid compare squid paragraph. Now, at this stage, I'm going to hand over to you. This is where I would like you to use the sources to come up with other statements, other ideas, other quotations, and other, things that we can infer about the people committing the crime in source A and in source B. So you could do that in two columns like you see here in note form. You could just print and then annotate the extracts themselves, whatever works for you best at this stage when we're not in an actual classroom with our normal resources to hand. So it would be really, really, really good for you to now go through and come up with some other differences between the people who commit the crime in source A, so the little boy, and the people committing the crime in source B. There's plenty more evidence in both those extracts for you to pull out and be able to infer in detail meaning from. Okay, so an overview of question 2 and the lesson and the learning that hopefully has taken place during this session. The question was, as you know, write a summary of the differences between the people committing the crime in each source. The acronym that I introduced you to for this question that I'd like you to use is SQUID, which, as we know, stands for statement about the first source, quotations to support that point, that statement, what you can infer or work out from those quotations, and then go even further, try and develop that inference in more detail. You then use a comparative connective to do the same with source B. Some top tips for you for this question. My advice would be, for the time that you have and the marks available, you would do SQUID, compare, SQUID twice. So, statement, quote, infer, develop about the first extract, whack in your comparative connective, then do it about the second extract, then go back to the first extract, compare, and go to the second extract. You haven't really got time to do any more than that. Another really important piece of advice, try and incorporate more than one quotation from each text within each of your SQUID points. Keep the quotations short. They may only be just 2 or 3 words, but more than one quotation will pad out your point nicely. Biggie, please, please, please don't bother analysing language. If you spot a metaphor, if you spot a simile, it doesn't matter. You're not looking at analysing language, you are simply inferring meaning from what you read. And as I've said, the key is to develop your inferences in detail. Don't just give a basic, brief, inferred bit of information. Go further. So you can use phrases like, this could also suggest, additionally we could infer, this also possibly infers that. So just add to your inferences. Go further with your inferences. and the exam board love it when you do that. That's it from me. Massive amounts of luck to you as you tackle this question. If you have any questions about this session or about anything that I've said, please feel free to email me at any time. We will be doing plenty more work on question 2 and the other questions, between now and when you sit your actual exams. So for now, I hope that this walkthrough, if you like, will serve you well in being able to understand the requirements of how to be successful with GCSE English Language Paper 2, Question 2. Thanks and good luck, Year 10.